Hello and welcome to the Could This Happen in Your Program podcast, where we find collaborative solutions for protecting New Yorkers and care. Conversations around accessibility often focus on checklists and compliance deadlines, yet at the heart of the matter is much simpler: people. When a person with a disability can access information on a website or a digital application, it's just one more step toward creating a more inclusive state for all. In this episode, we sit down with Michele Bruno from the New York State Office of Information Technology and Jeff Knaack from the New York State Digital Service Team to explore the human impact of accessible design, the shift from viewing accessibility as just a deadline to seeing it as an opportunity, and how New York is leading the charge by building accessibility into the very DNA of its digital infrastructure. Whether you're a provider with a small budget or a curious advocate, or even another state agency, this conversation offers a roadmap for making services truly accessible by design. Okay, well, welcome, Michele and Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us here today. So I'd love to start with just a little bit of background on the both of you. So Michele, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So I started a little over a year here at ITS. Before that, I was in the private sector, also doing accessibility work. Once Governor Hochul signed the New York civil law, I knew that accessibility was going to become a bigger, more
Right.
important thing here at New York State. And so I joined as the ITS Digital Accessibility Team Lead. We now have a team of 8, and we are working with the DCTs and the dedicated teams to understand a baseline of where they are with regards to digital accessibility and meeting web content accessibility guidelines, which is part of our New York State technology law. And so we're meeting them where they are. So we're doing common public-facing workflows, if you will, and we're doing a full accessibility review and then establishing communications with the teams to help them carry the torch, if you will, to continue and consistently make their web content accessible for all users.
Great. And Jeff?
I'm Jeff Knaack. I'm the Technical Solutions and Accessibility Engineering Director at the New York State Digital Service. The New York State Digital Service is part of the Office of General Services. If you know of the Federal Digital Service, we're kind of similar to that. We're a group of technologists, product managers, user experience designers, engineers who are working on improving the digital experience here in New York State for all New Yorkers. My background, I sort of have a non-traditional path into web development and technology. My degrees are in history and American history. I've never taken a programming class or anything like it, but I've always had an interest in technology and have been a web developer for about 20 years now. As of tomorrow, I will have been at OGS for 10 years in communications and digital roles. Now, as part of the New York State Digital Service, some of the products that I work on extensively are ny.gov, the official website of the state of New York, as well as the governor's website. And part of our New York State Digital Service experience that we provide to New York State agencies is something called the Digital First Standards, and a portion of that is accessibility related. We also do some accessibility engineering and consulting we work closely with our partners at ITS on various websites and applications, doing accessibility reviews down into the code level of accessibility remediations, and then also, sort of general digital accessibility and disability advocacy on the fringes of all of that. So,
Yeah, well, I've worked in the communication space for a very long time, and I can tell you with certainty that almost none of the programmers came from a very traditional, I am a programmer and this is the path I'm going to take. So I think you're in good company there. So we're here today to talk about digital accessibility, and I think that term means different things to different people. So I'm curious if you could give us your definition or even the state's definition of what digital accessibility means.
Sure. So watching the trends of, to your point, what people think accessibility is. It used to be that people thought accessibility was like closed captions on audio
Right.
and video content, right? And then as we start to raise the awareness of what the full suite of digital accessibility encompasses, and then trying to make that sort of bite-sized chunks so that people in various roles can understand what that means,
Hmm.
so that once we have the baseline of all that accessibility encompasses, breaking it down into small chunks, working through those chunks, and then moving on to the next level, so that we can um, consistently and continuously demonstrate accessibility maturity.
Yeah.
And so we're at the baseline now, but certainly I think and I hope that folks would better understand what accessibility is as they've been going through our test process and communicating with the teams and getting the engineers on the findings guidance meetings, so that they can
Hmm.
ask questions and, well, I thought this, well, no, here's why, or explain the user experience till the light bulb goes on, and then from hopefully from that forward, they expand their knowledge. And with all of our slew of resources across New York State now, the interesting thing is there's these pockets of accessibility all across, and I think of it like the New York State Symphony. So we have all these pockets of accessibility, and the music that we're going to make when we figure all of that out and where the gaps are, it's going to be a fantastic future for New York.
That's a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting. Digital accessibility, like sometimes the terms are at an arm's length and difficult for people to kind of grasp. But much like closed captioning on the technology side, like or user experience or web development side of things, like people would think, okay, well, we have blind users and we have users. Like that was kind of the only
Yeah.
distinction that a lot of people made.
Right.
When in reality, disability is a spectrum, and there's so much more to it than that. And when we bring other concepts into it, like assistive technology or any of the other pieces of what digital accessibility means, how disabled users actually use and interact with technology, it really opens up this really broad world. But digital accessibility is really an equity statement. It's about bringing equal access to people where they are, as Michele mentioned, like with all of the different technologies that we present information to them with, whether that's an application, a website, something that's more physical and interactive, like a kiosk, or anything else that falls under kind of the digital spectrum. It can be overwhelming, but there's a lot of areas where there's really, really good work happening and has been happening for a while.
And so, as Global Accessibility Awareness Day,
Right.
right, we're going to be down in the concourse, and so we hope that the desktops that we have set up, folks can stop by and get a better understanding of like
Mm.
some of the areas of accessibility that they may not otherwise be exposed to, and have an opportunity to ask questions and things, and not be shy about what it means, and try to experience other users that we would never ever think of unless you start dealing with digital accessibility. And so it really expands knowledge across the board.
Yeah, this was one area that I really brought me into my journey into accessibility, was watching a user who was blind, who had lost vision later in life, but used a screen reader, natively for years. Watching and listening to them use a screen reader on their device, the speed to which that they use that and that it read out information, and seeing the frustrations. And a lot of the frustrations were the same that sighted users had, but you could see the barriers being put in front of them to
Right.
being able to achieve that. And that experience was like, wow, I need to research more about this. I need to understand how do these technologies work? How can we, remove some of those barriers,
Mhm.
whether it's at a programmatic level or at like an awareness or a content level. So really, that, demonstrating for folks that, there's a lot of different ways that you can interact with technology is really, really important to, broadening their horizons to what accessibility means.
Yeah. And that's how we sort of break it down into those four like user buckets, one of them being the screen reader users,
Sure.
right? And also in that similar category is like low vision.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have to magnify the screen like
Mhm.
upwards of 400%. And what does
Mhm.
that do to your page all of a sudden? As well as colorblind users. We have colorblind folks on our staff. In
Right.
fact, that until we had this group, this community where you can't, you shouldn't feel slighted one way or the other about your abilities or lack thereof. And they've become very helpful in helping us critique content and colors and foreground and background colors. And then the hearing impaired users is the other sort of bucket that we try to think about, as well as those that can't use the mouse, right?
Right.
Mobility
Yep.
impairments and different types of input devices, and as simple as, can you navigate with the tab key? And
Yeah.
so that's one of our favorite sort of, especially for new folks in the accessibility arena, is you don't have to know anything about assistive technology tools necessarily. You
Yeah.
have one rate available at your hands right now, and it's using the tab key.
Yeah.
And so can
That's
you
a great-
navigate, left to right, top to bottom, make sure you can interact with all of the different buttons and links and things on a particular web page. It's a fantastic way to
Yeah.
start. And sensing that frustration that Jeff was just talking about, you very quickly, the light bulb goes on.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it starts.
Yeah, I think I mentioned when we met in advance that so the Justice Center hosts the trade program for New York State, the Technology Related Assistance for Individuals with Disabilities. And it basically offers free temporary device loans to people in need of assistive technology to either live, work, maybe they want to try a specific technology before they purchase it and make that investment. So we've had folks on from the different trade centers across New York State, and they brought all of the super cool devices that I just think are awesome. Including like these goggles that serve as a mouse, so you can, move a mouse with your eyes.
Mhm.
But it really did open my eyes a lot too. Things that, I think we often think of accessibility digitally like a checklist and compliance. And even I fall victim to this a lot too. When I'm going through, I'm like, did I meet this? Are the color standards correct? Are we meeting the contrast varieties? Are the headings appropriate? But it should really be thinking about the human element and how it's being used. And if you are thinking about all the different use cases, then you will hit those compliance check boxes.
Yeah, that's why we do have the grounding in standards like the WCAG standards, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which help to guide us down all of those different paths to try and cover the spectrum of disability. We can't always fix everything
Right.
for every user. 100% accessible is kind of a myth. And that's why there are some tools and things out there that will purport to tell you like, okay, you're 100% accessible, or you're fully accessible, or fully conformant. And in reality, it's a journey. It's a never ending, process. But we can really improve experience for users across that spectrum by hitting a lot of those, guidelines, focusing on the core technology, focusing on the people aspect of it and how people actually interact and use that. And getting the feedback from the disability community is a huge portion of that as well.
Yeah.
With the WCAG guidelines, so they are guidelines, right? So it's not prescriptive enough.
Sure.
And so, they're working on version 3, which it remains to be seen how that's going to look or when that's going to happen. But what we have to go on right now to 2, right, is what New York State laws and the information technology policy, we strive to meet the WCAG 2.2. And so how do you do that when there's no prescription, right? It's what it is that you need to do, but not necessarily how.
Right.
And so you have to think about it in the context of your own sort of silo of the work that you're doing, and then you pick the pieces of the guideline that make the most sense, and then that becomes, the how to do it, to supplement the what. And so it's really a challenge with the WCAG and especially folks starting out, is trying to make that connection. And so what we try to do is like break it down into the core principles, which is easy to remember: POUR, P-O-U-R,
I literally have
perceivable,
right here.
perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And so,
Okay.
so
All right, that's a great acronym.
that
I like
helps,
that.
But now, what does that mean, right?
Just add it to the list of acronyms.
Yeah.
In our
Yes,
daily
that
lives.
we're so famous for here. But helping again break it down into manageable chunks, at least to start, because we know it doesn't happen overnight. And we know it's a constant thing. It's never one and done.
Right.
There's no such thing as 100% conformance. But all we can do is continually strive to just make it better, and it's really better for everybody. Right.
Yeah, and a lot of those guidelines, there are many valid ways to meet them, and there's not necessarily one best way to do it.
Mm,
We try and cover the greatest number of user groups with the simplest possible method to achieve whatever that standard, relates to. And part of that is the consolidated work that ITS is doing to push forward a design system and some other things, to unify a lot of the technology approaches, so that we can all kind of present, a very similar baseline for accessibility, as a piece of the process. One thing that really gets left out a lot of the time is that accessibility doesn't always get brought in early on in the design phases, even in the ideation and decision phases about what you're going to build or who it's actually for. It's seen as that like compliance checklist at the end, like security or like something else. We just check this box, okay, it's accessible at the end. But in reality, it's far more expensive in terms of money, in terms of time, person hours, whatever it might be, to remediate a problem at the end of the process than it is to include that in the phases at the very beginning, whatever it might be. Because there are considerations and decisions that could be made along the way, whether it's design or technology, that can enable it to be more accessible throughout that process.
And so part of our process is trying to help shift left, right? The idea of, instead of waiting, like, we can come along and partner with the dedicated teams to do remediation testing, but again, it's after the fact. And so we want to shift that left and start to think about accessibility in the design, literally when you put pen to paper to
Yeah.
start sketching out things. If we have a better understanding of accessibility, we can start to, ideate accessibility in the design phase, because 60% of accessibility issues are in the design
Yeah.
phase.
Yep.
Now, granted, a lot of our transactional website applications are legacy, right?
Yeah.
They weren't developed last year or
Yeah.
even the year before, and so we're sort of playing catch up as best as we can. But the
Right.
modernization efforts that all of the teams are working on, we're starting to see it
Yeah.
happen more and more, and especially in procurement language now. We have
Yeah.
the details around accessibility in procurement language, as far as the vendor is responsible for doing their accessibility testing as they build out the products. And then when it's ready for production, then we can come alongside and do sort of a final check, if you will, to make sure that all the, I's are dotted and the T's are crossed with regards to accessibility,
Yeah.
because we're the ones that are liable when
Yeah.
it goes to production, not the vendor.
Right.
So we want, we're starting to have deeper conversations around that too, which is going to be a huge help, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, as you mentioned, Michelle, it's Global Accessibility Awareness Month is when this episode will air. And I think Governor Hochul has been very progressive with her commitment to accessibility, not just in the digital landscape, but elsewhere as well. What do you think What do you think makes New York different in this space and unique in comparison to other states?
Oh, good question. So I just happened to be on the NASIO, the National Association of States, the Accessibility Committee
Okay.
meetings, and New York State right now has the largest accessibility team across the members
That's
of,
really
of
prominent.
NASIO.
Yeah.
And so while they have a lot of public facing resources, because they've been at it for so much longer, I feel like they're really, like, it's really a great collaborative, because the resources that they may have or that they're looking for, like, they look to New York to see, like, well, how did you do this? Or how are you doing this? Or, my God, 8 people, like, how awesome must that be? Right. And it's just a lot of, like, we've come a long way in a little time for New York State, but that perception is we have a high bar, and we stand by it.
And that the field is evolving too. I mean, accessibility has always been there as part of technology, but that accessibility engineering, that the testing phases, that all of the pieces go into that are kind of valid career paths in either technology or communications is kind of new as well. And the investment in people to do that work is really critically important too. Because we have software that can help us do testing or help us with some of the remediations, and people bring up AI and things a lot with that. And sure, it can help as an adjunct, but in reality, we need people in the process in
Right.
the same way that we need designers, we need developers, we need accessibility specialists at every level to be able to help inform agency strategy when it comes to accessibility, the technical strategy, any of the other pieces around digital accessibility. It's really a career path. And even us, our team, the digital service, we're a very small team, but we recently were able to expand. And for the first time, I was able to hire an accessibility engineer for our team.
Hooray.
So, we're slowly making inroads on a lot of these areas. So
That's wonderful. Now, I've heard you both say accessible design is usable design. And I think that's a really important quote to bring away from our discussion today. I think a lot of people think of accessibility like, I'm really panicked to comply with these guidelines and I need to make sure I'm checking all these boxes. But really, it should be more, we are looking to improve the user experience for everyone. And that includes anyone who may interact with this digital storefront. So what would you say to speak to that in terms of, how we can all kind of reframe our thinking around accessibility, less about just, again, checking those boxes and more around really improving user experience, because it should help everybody, not just those using assistive devices or who may have a disability.
Right. And it does, right? And we've seen it. Think about like filling out a form field when you're trying to redo your registration online and the date of your birth is a specific format.
Yeah.
And you put something in other than that specified format. You and I can see an error message pop up. But what about, somebody that may not necessarily be perfect vision? How is that? And so we start to think about the people, because that's really what we're all about. Right?
Yeah.
And so accessibility is under human-centered design, and we need to think about the people first. And what we found is that when you help folks understand the user experience, it tends to resonate, especially if they know of someone. And it's not just the disabilities, it's the temporary disabilities.
Yeah.
Like I break my arm and
Right.
I can't use the mouse that
Yeah.
I'm used to. And so how am I going to navigate with the keyboard with just my left hand?
Sure.
So as we get older, our eyesight, right? And if we use small fonts, or if we use, colors, text on a background color that doesn't meet the minimum contrast, which is the WCAG statement, right? But the bottom line is, if I can't see it, as we start to get older with our eyesight, we need to think about that too. And situational too. I always like to use the example of I'm on the train going down to the New York City office, and I'm supposed to be, watching these videos. And so I need the closed caption on there, because you can't, the sound, comes
Carries.
and goes or carries or, and so wow, the importance of being able to enable closed captions. And that's just a temporary situation. And so, you think about all of the different ways that this disability comes into play, being able to build better for everybody. Again, it just makes a better user experience.
Makes sense.
For everybody.
Yeah, and a lot of times accessibility is kind of seen as this thing happening at the end of the process. It's a hassle. Here's some more standards we have to adhere to. It's going to limit our creative design. It's going to limit our technology options. When in reality, if you include it early in that process, you're really not limited. The prescriptions of the standards and other things don't prohibit us from using any particular method. It just means that we have to include everybody who's actually in our user base to do that.
Yeah. And I think everybody probably out there who you speak to, at least nowadays, wants to create an experience that's accessible. I think there is a little bit of fear around, I'm not sure, I think it is. So are there any tools out there, or aside from the more prescriptive procedural, like the WCAG and all the different standards out there, are there tools that the average user, even outside the state, I know, you all are excellent resources for all of us comms folks, but are there tools out there for anybody operating a website who wants to create a more accessible experience?
There's definitely some simple automated testing tools tools, the main caveat with any of those tools, whether they're AI driven or not, is that those things can really only test for about 30% of the
Okay.
real barriers to access. So they can test for the things like color contrast or proper structure in some ways that have some like technology equivalent, but they don't have any context, they don't have any cognition, so they don't know if this thing is useful or not. So tools like Wave, there's DeQ has a tool called Axe, which is an auditing tool which allows you to inspect and see a report generated about your website. Microsoft has the Accessibility Insights extension. A lot of your other going beyond websites into documents, Word and PowerPoint have built in now an accessibility checker. And then in PDFs,
Yes, it's very helpful. I've noticed.
it will make those suggestions like, did you actually use bulleted lists and headings? You should use heading 1, 2, and 3.
There's a lot of text on this slide.
Right, exactly. Those kind of suggestions about the actual structure of the thing that you're creating, so that you're setting it up for success when it transitions to the next format, or so that those different assistive technologies can see and interpret all of the different pieces of that. For PDFs and documents, there's in Acrobat, there's an accessibility checker. There's some other free tools out there too. But kind of to one of Michelle's earlier points, one of the best things that you can do as a user trying to think about, interacting with technology in a way that is not your standard paradigm, like clicking with a mouse or using your hand on a touch device, is to use your keyboard to navigate. Most devices that you could possibly have screen readers built into them. And a lot of times those are the screen readers that users actually do use. In Apple products, it's VoiceOver. Windows, there's NVDA, JAWS, Narrator, a lot of other ones that are available out there. Some of them have license fees like JAWS, but NVDA is a free one for all of our PC users. All Mac devices have VoiceOver built in, whether they're an iPhone or a tablet or a desktop. So you can become familiar with these tools. There's lots of very good tutorials out there. Understanding and testing and using these tools and becoming familiar you can see those different areas where barriers are presented to folks in using these things.
And those tools, by the way, that Jeff mentioned, other than JAWS, are like all free. They're available on the web. You don't need a license. And I'm gonna shift left here for a minute again, because to start, if you're building something, if you're starting, from the bottom, if you will, learn how to create it accessibly, and then you don't even necessarily have to worry too much about the end point. Right? And so, to Jeff's point, there's a slew of resources out there. You want to be careful with them, and that's why we talk about our SharePoint site so much, because what's out there has been vetted and trusted, right? And we can support it. But starting with how do I create an accessible document? Well, what is the format? Okay, if it's Word, you start here and enable the accessibility widget as you go along that prompts you to do as much as you can up front with regards to accessibility. And then your testing is going to go, for the most part, pretty quick with the automated tool. And that 60-70% that's required for manual is the user experience that we all, are familiar with. And how does the thing that you just built work with, just the keyboard navigation. And so I think the challenge is getting started, and that's why we're doing our very best to come alongside the teams to help them find out, where do I start with this mound of information that I just learned about. And so, we break it up into actionable steps to help them move forward, and then ultimately it's going to become part of what you do every day.
Right.
And if you're procuring a tool, even if you're not building something, if you're buying or using off-the-shelf software, begin to ask those questions of the vendor. Say, do you have an accessibility conformance report? What is your accessibility status of this product? Because there might be assumptions around, okay, well, it's accessible, or if it's on contract or something, like, does that mean it's accessible? And a lot of times, companies will have voluntary testing done. They'll have a conformance report ready, which shows you, to what degree in general does this software meet some of those WCAG standards and other things. And including that now in procurement language is incredibly important for state agencies, but even municipalities and local and others. because lots of products are not accessible by default, or rather, you might have to take some steps to make them more accessible by, increasing color contrast or using, proper headings or whatever it might be within the program or tool itself. So.
And so when we think about those reports, it's not whether it's accessible or not. It's more about, people with perhaps this type of disability may have a challenge navigating this area because of, right? And it's very defined. And I think a misperception about the VPATs and the ACRs is that, well, if you have it, it means it's accessible.
Right.
And that's not necessarily accurate. Now, there are some VPATs out there that does not support all the way down, and that's a red flag to be careful with. Like, what does this mean for our users, and do we want to proceed? But it's information that we take in, and we do what we need to with it with regards to whatever it is that we're looking for from that vendor.
Sure. Well, you've given a lot of great advice today. Are there any other tips for the good of the order you would share with our listeners today?
I would say one of the most important takeaways that you can have from this is trying to understand how disabled users actually interact with technology. That human element is so important. You can study the standards, you can look at all the different tools, but really understanding how people interact with technology, you can see the barriers, you can see the frustrations, and the frustrations are very similar to frustrations we all have with technology, whether it's that error message or a screen reloading in a way that is difficult, or a form forgetting your information, or something being slow or difficult to operate on a particular device. These are kind of across the board, barriers to users. So really, the more you understand how people use technology and what assistive technology is for folks, the more you can start to see where in my career, in my daily job, can I make some of those inroads, and be the person who asks the question. Say, is this accessible? Have we considered accessibility in whatever way? And you don't have to be an expert to do that. You just a small amount of education and asking the right questions, you can start to learn all of the pieces and, be the advocate, be the champion for accessibility in your organization.
And knowing where to ask the questions is the other thing, right? We want to be careful to a certain extent of what's out there on the web, but to Jeff's point, ask questions and ask questions and keep asking questions, because that's how we all learn.
Right.
And accessibility is no different. And we do have office hours twice a month that you can just join and lurk and hear the conversations about what's going on with accessibility, right down into hearing from engineers about this challenge that they have, or a red light that went on for them about, oh my gosh, what about this? And their resolution, and sharing the passion that they have, like, I came across this and I fixed it by doing this. And so FYI, everybody else, and so it really is a sharing, a community that you can feel free to ask those questions. And then together we elevate the accessibility so that, that symphony really starts to play some fine music.
And there's a really vibrant community out there too, in accessibility. There's so many really good experts, so many very, very good articles, other resources for Global Accessibility Awareness Day. There's often lots of guest speakers and talks. DQ and others do, conferences and presentations around that. It's a good sort of entry door to understanding what accessibility means for whatever it is you might work on. So.
So find one thing that is like most intriguing or most interesting, or a family member, a friend, a partner that has some, level, and expand on it and learn a little bit about it. And you'll be amazed about how just the user experience and accessibility, it does not have a sexy, fun name to it, but it's just so important for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I know I have my marching orders. I'm sure our listeners do as well. So I really appreciate it and talking about this important topic. And we hope to have you back.
Our pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.